Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking your seats here in the room, and hello to everybody who's joining us online. People are continuing live, but we'll try and stick to our advertised time. My name's Jason Glanville. I'm Wiradjuri. I live here on Gadigal land. I'm also an adjunct professor at the Jumbunna Institute here at University of Technology, Sydney. And so with those hats on, I'm also a member of the board of the Ebony Institute and executive director of Ebony. I'll be hosting the conversation this evening. I want to start by acknowledging the Gadigal on whose land those of us in the room are gathering on tonight. As a long-term resident of Gadigal land, I want to acknowledge their ongoing generosity to me and my family and to all of us who call Sydney home, and to acknowledge, given that we are broadcasting online as well today, to acknowledge the diversity of nations that people are coming into this conversation from. I also want to acknowledge our very generous hosts here at UTS, particularly the Jumbunna team, Robin Quiggin, Larissa Barrent and Lyndon Coombs, who's helped to pull not just this event but a week of big conversations together this week. I also want to thank the Anna Miller Foundation, Anna Miller First Nations Foundation, who have been present with us this week and are also present online, the Dusseldorp Forum, and the group of thought leaders, community leaders, activists, organisers who have been with us here over the last 2 days in conversation with all the panellists, but particularly with Adam Kahane and the RIOS team, talking about this question of transformative scenario process and its relationship to our evolution as a set of First Nations communities in Australia, and what that means for the question of Australia. By way of a bit of additional context, the conversation that we're having tonight, off the back of 2 very full days of conversations that we've had here at UTS over the last couple of days, has quite a long tail. Really, Adam's connection to Australia goes back about 20 years, and there have been many attempts to engage Adam and his team and the transformative scenario process over the course of the intervening 2 decades, and through a range of fortuitous interactions 5 or 6 years ago, as the Ebony Institute was really finding its feet, had some interaction with a TSP process elsewhere with First Nations leaders elsewhere in the world, in North America, which I think planted the seeds that have grown into the conversation that we're all a part of today. And the core theme to the conversations that we've had, the core purpose to the work that we're co-designing together, is to unstick business as usual. There's a less polite description for the work that we're doing, but given that we're transmitting online, I won't give you the less polite version, but you might be able to imagine what that is given the state of affairs in Australia at the moment. But we are committed to imagining what could be possible for First Nations communities, families, organisations across Australia, and then at some stage in the future, when it suits us as First Nations people, to think about the possibility of our vision for the future of Australia being part of a dialogue with the broader Australian community. So we're very lucky tonight to have the panellists that we do. All 3 of our panellists have been in the room that I've been describing over the last 2 days, asking some very big questions and nailing some of the answers, but also helping to frame what some of the next big questions might look like as well. I'll introduce the panellists as I invite you to speak, but we're thrilled to have all three of you here tonight. Thank you. As well as being in the room and broadcast live, the conversation is being recorded for a range of purposes, and we've had a great deal of interest from people who couldn't be present for this hour this evening to engage with the recording. So we're looking forward to the message being broadcast far and wide. But Adam, as our visitor, I'll start with you, and having read through these bios a couple of times, which I know that you've all supplied, I can guarantee that they don't do any of you justice, but I'll honour the words that you've committed to paper and read them out by way of introduction. Adam is globally respected for his work in using the transformative scenario process to prepare South Africans to prepare for a new social and economic order after apartheid was ended and democratic elections took place. He now uses this process to create solutions to complex social problems across the globe. Adam is the author of Solving Tough Problems, Power and Love, Transformative Scenario Planning, Collaborating with the Enemy, and Facilitating Breakthrough. And Adam, I think you're just back from another writing sabbatical in South Africa, and so we're looking forward to the next book arriving soon. But I guess we've spent a couple of days together, but in this context I wanted to say welcome to Australia, and I guess welcome to UTS, acknowledging that UTS, particularly Jumbunna, are critical partners in the work that we're doing together. And we're thrilled to have you here as part of and leading those conversations with us, particularly at this time in your extraordinary career when you have all sorts of reasons to be slowing down or settling down or choosing to do other things. But you and the team have done and continue to do such profound and impactful work all across the world, and you've shared some of those examples with us over the last couple of days. But it would be great to hear a bit more about what drew you to Ebony and the challenge of thinking about the application of transformative scenario planning in Australia, and what learnings you've drawn from the co-design process that we've all been a part of, not just these last 2 days, but the last few months.
Well, thank you, Jason, and thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and happy and honored to be with you and on this land and in this institution. It's been an amazing few days, so let me start there with what I was going to say excited, but I think inspired's a better word. And I think maybe the clearest and strongest way I can say it is what's obvious, I think, is that many of the systems that we're living in Australia, in Canada, elsewhere, are not working for many people. But to put it more strongly, these systems were not built for Indigenous people. In many cases, these systems were built against Indigenous people. And just before I walked over here, I remembered this statement by the Nigerian novelist Ben Okri, which seems exactly on point for the work that we've been designing these last few days. He said, "The worst realities of our age are manufactured realities. It is therefore our task as creative participants in the universe to redream our world. The fact of possessing imagination means that everything can be redreamed. Each reality can have its alternative possibilities. Human beings are blessed with the necessity of transformation." And so what inspires me about the way this work has been unfolding the last few days is that it's clear that the work we're doing is not to mediate between the established systems and alternatives. It's to transform these systems and to transform what is possible. And secondly, to do that not in a way that works for other places, but in a way that works here, and for this process to be First Nations led, which has many implications, political and cultural implications. So you asked why I'm here. It's very straightforward. It's an extraordinarily committed and thoughtful convening team from Ebony and Jumbunna, and it's important work. It's important for blackfellas. I think it's important for Australia, and it's clear to me it's important for all of us around the world. So there's no place in the world that I'd rather be than right here, right now. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam. It's very characteristically generous of you. And we'll come back to some of the points you've made, but I want to bring the other panelists in and introduce Dr. Auntie Mary Graham. Now this CV is hardly sufficient, but as I said, I'll read it off the paper. But those of you who know Auntie Mary know that her profundity and impact goes much broader than these words. But Dr. Mary Graham is a Kombumerri person through her father's side and a Waka Waka through her mother's side. She grew up in southeast Queensland, is an adjunct associate professor in political studies at the University of Queensland, and with a career spanning more than 30 years has worked across government, community organisations and universities. She's been a dedicated lecturer with the University of Queensland teaching Aboriginal history, politics and comparative philosophy. She's written and published many prominent works, including publications in the Aboriginal Encyclopedia, training modules for cross-cultural awareness, and a host of other academic papers. As I said, that doesn't even touch the sides of the kind of contribution and impact that Auntie Mary has had and continues to. And in that context, Auntie Mary, I wanted to say welcome and thank you. You've been with us in the room the last 2 days, providing, as you so often do for so many of us, a point of reflection and provocation and reflection in terms of the potential for this work. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, to reflect on, having heard what Adam just said about why the work is important to him, and having spent the last 2 days with us, how you're feeling about the potential for this transformative scenario work at this time in Australia's history.
Well, I've, as I said today, I think, I've came with some expectations about change for the future, positive change for the future, and especially not only the theory of this change, but the methods of how it can be done, TSP. And I think I found it in TSP. Yeah, I think it's going to be a wonderful experience for lots of blackfellas in different parts of the country. If TSP is figuring on sticking around for a while, you know, and travelling a bit, meeting other blackfellas. It's in its methods, as I've found, it bears I found a striking resemblance to actually both the old traditional idea of consensus, but also the recent short term of National Congress, an experiment in Aboriginal governance, which was swept away by the government of the day. I don't think it only lasted about 2 terms. But it's about Aboriginal people, the people who take part in this, this theory of change, how we can gain some kind of control, but also understanding of how to deal with the kind of change that we need. But how do we do this? Because it's always been a system, the intention of colonialism around the world to destabilise, to begin with several centuries ago, because they're, you know, engaged in basically taking over people's countries, robbing them of their great wealth and resources and so on. So they modernised that system over the centuries, and essentially they're still basically doing it. Whoever controls all the resources in the world, basically, you know, they're the king of the globe. But a lot of people recognise that a different global governance system is required, but the hard part of it for us, for Indigenous people everywhere, is to find out how we can do this at the same time as trying to escape various colonial punishments by the state, you know, and being kept in a state of undevelopment, really. So there was an old book written, and I'm sorry, I forget who it was, but how Europe, Africa, basically that, you know, and that is still going to go on. So how do we fight back against that? Apart from, you know, what everybody knows as the military system of fighting for independence and so on. But how do we do it among ourselves, because it's already done as they always expect to do, colonials, to, you know, upset our own system, keep us at arm's length from our own governance system. This TSB, just from what I've only just come across it, you know, and had great pleasure in working with people, you know, through Ebony, Jumbunna, in how to work through this theory of change. There's lots of theories of change, but this is probably the best one I've come across now. And I look forward to keeping working with them on it. And yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Andy. Well, there's a lot in that we'll come back to as well, but Hayley, to bring you into the conversation as well. Hayley would be well known to many. Hayley's a Durrumbul and South Sea Islander woman born and raised in Rockhampton in central Queensland. Her work centred on community relationality and convening new collectives to rethink education. Hayley is the co-founder and CEO of the National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition, co-chair of Learning Creates Australia, and a board member of a number of not-for-profit organisations, including the Ebony Institute. Hayley brings over 10 years of experience working across Indigenous policy and training, and has worked on advocacy campaigns and capacity building initiatives with education coalitions and young people around the world. And Hayley, as I said, you're a member of the Ebony board, and you've been on this journey for a while now, and as your CV says, you also play a significant leadership role, not just in a number of institutional, organisational contexts, but more generally in the real politic of contemporary Aboriginal affairs. So I guess a version of the question I put to Adam and Auntie, but from your perspective, with all those different threads to pull together, why transformative scenario process, and why now for us, and at this stage in Australia's development? And I'll also ask you the really easy question, going back to the purpose of the conversations we've been having the last couple of days. What needs to be unstuck?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Gee, how do you follow Adam Kahane and Dr. Mary Graham? But I'll give it a go. I think what really needs to be unstuck, and well, what gets us stuck, is that we focus too much on the 20% that we can't agree on rather than the 80% that does connect us. And so I think why transformative scenario planning is important, and why the Ebony Institute has worked with Adam and the team on an Indigenous version of that that's suited for our context, which we named Kamaji is because it provides the space to extend our horizons for us to just focus on, well, what is that 80%? But also for us to think strategically and act strategically in the best interest of our future generations. And I think in doing this work, we also have to accept that we're doing this to benefit the people that we love and care about that we'll never ever meet. You know, that's who our future generations are. And so it's also not about the, in my opinion, you want to see immediate impact, but this is about the long-term vision and the foundations that we're setting up for our next generation. And so I think it's important that we create the space and the time and take that intentional process to think about, well, what are those future scenarios and what's our ideal scenarios and how do we work towards them, especially in a context where our world is just so rapidly changing. Our worlds are just so uncertain. Like, we don't even know what skills young people are really going to need in the future. We don't know what jobs are going to exist. And so we really can't be 100% sure of what that future will be like. And so if we're not really sure, then I guess the question is, well, what's the point? What's the purpose? And I think what TSP offers, it's the through, it's the how we get there, it's how we work together we have that ideal picture of where we want to go. But what TSP offers is the space to work out the relationships and the relationships that are needed to carry those future scenarios forward. And I think we can learn from, and because you asked the question around like, why now? I think we can't ignore the last referendum. You know, the last referendum, if we thought about it, it was a scenario that was presented to the public, a possible scenario. And yeah, the details and how it would be structured and all that was going to come after the public decided. But you know, even that, in that scenario, there was still a level of uncertainty. We didn't know what that final thing would be like. It was just an option. That was kind of a different way of working together, a different arrangement. But I think in reflecting on that process, and this is not to cast any blame because there was like so many reasons to attribute these things, but I don't think what we did well enough during that referendum process was to consider the through, to consider the how did we want the 3% to feel in the process, how did we want to convene the spaces for the 3% to think about, well, what does this mean for us? What does this, in this future scenario, what comes next for us on our terms? I don't think we did that well enough, and I don't think there was a process available at that time that facilitated that well enough. And yeah, so I just to say that, and also to say like, even like there was division, there was like difference of opinion, but I think for the majority of blackfellas through that process, regardless of where their opinion rested in the referendum, the underlying value was love for our community, love for the best possible future. And see, that was the 80% that was there that we didn't pay attention to, was the love that we all share. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, really that is the value of TSP. It's that it intentionally creates the space to think about the through, to think about the relationships and the way that we want to be in relationship with each other and to renegotiate those futures together. And, you know, I know that there's uncertainty, but I think we can also take comfort in the certainty of our land and our water and our seas and our skies, because regardless of where we are or where we'll be, that's our connection to our future generations. It's thinking about the land that holds the space for these conversations. And I know I'm ranting, but that's because I only wrote notes for this question. So good work with the other ones. But but I also just think about like my Jumbunna language that's going through that process of revitalization. You know, it was sleeping for a while, but now it's coming up. Like we're starting to speak it again. And I think that the survival of that language is because of the foresight of my old people. Like they're the ones who made sure that it was recorded somewhere, or that family continued to speak it and have it known. And I think about those old people, would they have imagined that we would all be walking around with computers in the palm of our hands? Probably not. But they knew that without our language, we wouldn't know ourselves. And so that's a value that I still hold for my future generations. Even though I don't know what kind of world they're going to inherit, I know the value that I want for them. And so I think that's the opportunity with this process, and what we're wanting from this process is for us to just have space and to think about what are the values that we want to have carried through, and what are the processes and what's our obligations and responsibilities to act right now. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. I mean, again, all three of you so much in each of those responses, and I'm so tempted to move off script, but I think one of the themes that's really struck all of us in the lead-up work to these last couple of days, but particularly during these last couple of days, is the difference between should and could. We spend so much of our time in First Nations problem solving in Australia, about being told what we should do, or being forced to respond to other people's agendas in terms of what should be done to solve these wicked problems, and not nearly enough convening of spaces that allow us to hold the future with the kind of love that you're talking about, and ask ourselves, give ourselves the space and time to think about the could, and the could as a way through, rather than acknowledging that kind of dreaming, reminding ourselves that we're at our best when we're in each other's company, with the right space and time. I think we've learned a lot about that over the last couple of days, and a lot more to talk about on that. But Adam, some of the anecdotes and direct lessons that you've learnt from your extraordinary experiences of leading change with others across the planet have been really present in the last couple of days. But before I do go off script and dig into some of the bigger themes that the three of you have talked about, I wonder if you could share some of your anecdotes from those experiences elsewhere, and I think particularly where you can see not just the value of those experiences in helping us to grow this work and to understand it, but also where I guess this First Nations lens has become important, an important theory of change in its own right for your thinking.
Yeah, let me offer two stories briefly. One from the beginning of my experience 30 years ago, and one from the present. I got started in this work in 1991, working in South Africa on a project that became known as the Montreal scenario exercise. And for those of you who don't remember the chronology, 1991 was 1 year after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, but 3 years before the first democratic elections. And so the future was completely uncertain. I think most people, both South Africans and internationally, were pessimistic about the prospect for a peaceful outcome. But it was a moment where things were starting to shift. There was a sense that change was possible, and that there was an opportunity that had to be seized. And in that context, two conveners from a historically black university there, the University of the Western Cape, organized this project, and they did something nobody had ever done before, which is they convened a scenario team, not just of fellow academics or experts, but of leaders from across South African society, which meant black and white, opposition and establishment, politicians, trade unionists, academics, business people, and use this method, the scenario method, which had never been used in this context, to think about what was possible in South Africa. And what they ended up with was 3 ways the transition could fail, which they called ostrich, lame duck, and Icarus, and 1 scenario about what it would take for the transition to be successful, which they called Flight of the Flamingos. And I remembered yesterday that the reason they chose flamingos was exactly the overlap with Kamarji Garba, because it meant, or because it signified, rising together, as flamingos do when they take off. So for me, that's an omen or a signal. And the Montfleur scenario exercise by no means was responsible for the transition in South Africa, but it made a contribution among many others, and especially to the economic policy of the Mandela government. Now, the 2 learnings I take away from that, one you've already mentioned, Jason, that what people were used to talking about or arguing about or fighting violently about is what should happen. And when we change the conversation from what should happen to what could happen, a whole other, I guess you would say, dreaming was enabled. And that was extraordinary. The other methodological lesson was that for the first time, people were using scenarios not just to figure out how to adapt to an uncertain world, but how to shape an uncertain world. And that's where the idea of transformative scenarios process came in. The second example, if I fast forward 30 years, is work that my colleagues and I have been doing in Hawaii, starting in 2022 and ongoing now, on a project which has become known as Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul. And the context, for those of you who know about Hawaii, is increasing conflict and stuckness, especially between Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians, and the danger of a scenario, as one of them put it, of Hawaii without Hawaiians, just some tropical place for Australians and others to visit. But that Hawaii's soul, which it turns out is dear not just to Native but also to non-Native Hawaiians, was in danger of being lost. So that team, unlike what we're talking about here, but in response to that particular context, was Native and non-Native Hawaiians. And the impact of that project and the learning for me is when we organize such a process, but which is, in this case, Native Hawaiian-led, where the meetings and the culture and the approach and the philosophy and the methodology draw on indigenous wisdom, amazing things can happen. And that reconnecting or rediscovering the value and the contribution, in this case, of Native Hawaiian law, has unblocked an extraordinary flowering of very practical work on land, on the relation with the military, on education, on tourism, and there's now all kinds of action being taken by a large group of people as a result of this project. So the possibility I see, what I see could happen through this work with First Nations here in Australia, is the possibility of getting unstuck. or as you said today, Auntie Mary, of getting restuck to the old ways from which we have become unmoored. This was so important today, thank you. The possibility of getting unstuck, the possibility of transforming these oppressive systems, the possibility of a future which is different from the past. And this is not easy or guaranteed or straightforward, but it is possible, and I think we can do it.
I'm sure we can. Thank you, Adam. There's, again, many threads to pull from that, but Auntie Mary, I wanted to ask you to, as you've done over the last couple of days, share your reflections around two of the things that you talked about, Adam, or two of the things that stood out among many in that answer. One is the power of storytelling, the importance of stories, and how we, not just in doing the work together, focus on the outcomes, but to think about how we draw each other in through our own personal stories and the stories that connect us at a human level. And, you know, Auntie Mary, you reminded us a lot over the last couple of days about the centrality of storytelling to us as First Nations people and the role that that continues to play. And then connecting that, Adam, to your other point, which was about the difference that having First Nations leadership and First Nations terms of reference and values have brought, particularly to the process in Hawaii. And I wonder, Auntie Mary, if you can talk a bit more. The last couple of days you've said a couple of times, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I also know entirely seriously that we're going to end up running the show again eventually, so they should just get out of the way and let us do it.
Yes.
Which we all fiercely agree with. But I wonder what you think some of the challenges are to genuinely centering First Nations wisdom, First Nations voices, that First Nations terms of reference in the way that we think about the future.
Yeah, sure. I'm a great believer in education, especially, of course, Aboriginal education, our schools and so on, but also in general, Australian schools. They should make it a required thing, part of the curriculum, to learn to have philosophy, you know, Western philosophy, to understand who they actually are and where they come from, not geographically, but where they come from in history, you know, and what all that meant. Learn, of course, Aboriginal philosophy, Aboriginal ways of how we ran the country and still think and believe and feel and so on, and especially the stories. But also, and it might give people a shock, but the education system, I mean, is to learn something about the neighbours, the Australasia. You know, this is Australasia. So it would be fantastic, I think, if Australian education could also learn something, and probably the most famous is Confucianism, because everybody knows Confucius, you know, all around the world. So something like that. I think that should be, those three things should be required in ordinary Australian schools, you know, right across the whole country. And I think it would go a great long way towards helping Australians, all Australians, to become not only more knowledgeable about their neighbourhood, and of course about us, but learn exactly where they are, and that they're going to be here for a very long time. You know, it's not an outpost of Europe, and so to develop what relations and have a relationless view as opposed to a survivalist view about this relational connection. Because they have to do that. That will also help in becoming more cultivated and cultured properly, so that we might actually end up having even relations with the rest of the world in a far more cultured way, you know, and very knowledgeable and excellent in all ways. The part of that, the thing that has always been like a vision for me is that, as I've said a couple of times, and it sounds ludicrous and outlandish, but Aboriginal people are going to run the country again one day. All 3% of us as against 97%. But the great age, you know, our society is one of great age and has learnt a great deal about how to run a stable country for eons of time. And the big difference between survivalism and a survivalist ethos and relationalism and a relationalist ethos. And I think the world itself, as I was saying before, it's ready for a big global change, hopefully before World War III breaks out. But how to do that, they couldn't do worse than ask some advice from Aboriginal people about how to do that. So the governance system, I think Western governance system, which has been called, a whole lot of countries around the world have been called a civilizational state. So the idea of the state itself has to change. But what we have to offer is a civilizational culture, actually. And I think a civilizational state has to learn how to be more of a civilizational culture. Because that way, it's the pathway to a stable country, stabilisation. And of course, as I said, I think before, you know, colonialism has spent the last several centuries, 400 or 500 centuries, in destabilising half the rest of the world, you know, and it's not going to last. It's on its way down, that system. And nobody, especially in the Western media and West in general, wants to acknowledge that, but it is. So should try and have a vision like this of what kind of country Australia could be. I've been working on, not just me, my mob up there, we've been working on a different kind of way, which it's amazing fate, isn't it, you know? We're thinking of something like this following, I'll tell you, and this TSP, how it works, because we will need TSP to help us to actually do it. I realised that over the last couple of days. So in the larger sense of Australia reimagined, we work on a civilisational culture, joining with a civilisational state, and hopefully leading a civilisational state into better ways of thinking and imagining what things could be as opposed to what things are now and how it's not too good. And also ending up with an Australia, first of all, Australia reimagined, and then Australia reformed, not reformed, it's a different word actually, a different one altogether. So they're bookends. What happens in between is a whole lot of things, good things, like TSP, actually. But the local example of this we're working on at the moment is the idea of, because the environment has so much to do with everything. From our point of view, this is where we learn our relationalism. The foundation of the relationalist ethos is the relationship between humans and land. You learn to look after land, and that's how you learn to look after something greater than yourself, outside of the self. And then you also learn how to strengthen conscience, how to have a conscience in the first place, and then how to maintain it and strengthen it and so on. And that's part of the pathway to a stable society, you know. So anyway, the thing we're looking at up there, our lot, between what citizenship is, so a citizenship reimagined, and citizenship reformed. It's not the word I'm thinking of actually, but it's like regeneration. But how it will be regenerated is to learn to bring citizenship and stewardship together. So the idea is to change citizenship, to bring stewardship into citizenship. I know it goes way back, the idea of citizens, you know, civitas and so an old European idea, Greek philosophy and all that. But stewardship is much older, and it belongs to this country, and it should be the way of running a country, a custodial ethos and so on. I always think it would be a wonderful idea of having a collective meaning of life, stewardship, custodial ethos. You can have your own personal meaning of life, of course, everybody can, but the one that would be very good for society would be something like that. So we're just talking about how, and arguing, I must say, among ourselves up there about how to do this, and then all of a sudden, fate intervenes, thanks to Ebony and Jumbunna, and we meet up with TSP because I'm pretty sure that's how we're going to do it. How do you bring local government? When I was young, I wanted a treaty. Now I'm not quite sure about a treaty, because is it even possible to have a treaty with the colonial mob who want to keep you in your place? You know, put their message basically to all Indigenous people everywhere, as I see it, is, look, put up with your colonised lot in life and shut up and go away. And that's the message I got from the recent, what do you call it, the referendum, and that's really what the no is. It was also part of the wrong way of approaching a problem or an argument or a scenario, actually, of using what you can call Greek philosophy, the excluded middle. Either you vote this way or you vote that way. Either or. It's guaranteed to start conflict. Guaranteed, that kind of thinking, that kind of logic. You know, that's how it works. And I'm sure it was, I'm not being suspicious of, surveillance and all that kind of stuff, but I'm sure it was meant to fail because of that. So the idea of, our old idea is how to get local government, because just think about it, local government fits almost like a glove with Aboriginal ideas of the land. If you've ever seen a local government map of the whole, various areas, and then seen the Aboriginal map, Aboriginal language map, it fits, So I think a relationalist connection, a proper one, and positive and logical and efficient and all the rest of it, effective, could happen. And I think these last few days I've just found the proper way, a very good way of how to bring that idea, that notion together actually. Because we have to work on, instead of as we have usually done, and a lot of our lot do, just go to government and argue the fact, look, this is what you should be doing, like you're saying before, but this is what we could do with citizenship and stewardship, with the help of TSP. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Again, having an hour for these conversations seems a bit silly, but this will be the first of a series of conversations we have to get further into these issues. But Adam, I just wanted to, and Adam and Hayley, I have big questions for the both of you as we have about 10 minutes left in this conversation. But one of the things that you talked a lot about, Auntie Mary, was, in your view, the ultimate demise of the current dominant system, however you imagine that, colonialism, globalisation, capitalism, whatever it might be. And without giving too much of the process away, Adam, I think we all went into the room over these last 2 days assuming that we deal with our current relationship with the current system, and then to imagine a set of new scenarios, new opportunities in response to that. But really quite quickly we came to the agreement to basically ignore the current system and to invest ourselves really in that set of possibilities of what could happen as that inevitability starts to take hold. It's a big question, Adam, I'm sorry, and we don't have a lot of time, but I just wonder how that differs from where the work you've done elsewhere and where you think that's important in this idea of what could be for Australia.
Well, I don't see it exactly that way. I think when we talk about what could happen, we need to also consider scenarios of the current system limping along, perhaps as it is, perhaps catastrophically, for a while or a long time, and what will that mean for us? So it's not just talking about what we hope will happen, but what's possible, including scenarios that we might find frightening or painful. I think what was clear to me, though, is our objective is not to patch up the current system, but to find a way to renew the system against these different possible scenarios.
Thanks. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, sorry for misconstructing that, but I think the real power of that for all of us was the sense of freedom we had to start with the could, rather than being driven always by the should, as insisted by the dominant system. And Hayley, there's a lot in what Auntie Mary said about the critical nature of education and the role that plays, particularly in the lives of young people, to your point about, you know, the generations that we're doing this work for that we'll never meet. And I know that among many things, you're launching a new tool later in the week, an education tool that centres relationality and truth and all the things that we've been talking about. And so I wondered if, it's again, a big question before we wrap up, but what you think in that education space, are you seeing any sparks of hope? Are you seeing any rays of light that could help us to get to the point that Auntie Mary's talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Just briefly, we're about to launch our first ever research report that examined the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander school exclusion from the 19th century to current day across every jurisdiction. It's the first time it's been all in the one place. And I think what really is the spark is that what we found from the very beginning is that, yes, our kids were excluded from the education system from the very establishment, but at the same time, the fight and the resistance of our family was also evident. We resisted that exclusion from the very beginning. And so I think, if anything, the spark or the hope is that the spark and the hope is in the activism and the strength of our mob. Like, we've always been adaptive. We've always thought of different ways and different strategies to approach like these ongoing challenges that we face. So yeah, I think the biggest one is that I don't think the work that NIAC is doing is anything new. It's just that we're doing a different strategy with a different generation to address the issues and the ambitions that our old people have laid out for us.
Yeah. Thanks. And also to acknowledge that the beauty of the Ebony network is the connectedness through organisations like NIAC and others to bring that First Nations architecture in to the task at hand, which is a big one. And to that point, and to leave you with the final word, Hayley, I know everyone here in the room and all of our friends online and those who have asked to see this as a recording, their primary question is how can our First Nations brothers and sisters, our allies and friends in the room and online, what is it that they can do to support Ebony, Rios, Jumbunna and Dusseldorp in this transformational work?
Well, I think for me, I come from the background of building coalitions, and so it takes a diverse group of people with different skills and abilities and access to all different kinds of room to come together to work around something and support something under a shared ambition. So I think my ask would be, one, to trust blackfellas, trust that we can do this work and we could do it for our mob, because we've got the history. We've demonstrated it over and over again. To trust the process, trust TSP, trust Kamaji Garaba, trust the expertise of Adam and Dr. Mary Graham and the people who have been guiding this. Like, trust that we're doing this with the best intentions for those future generations. And also just trust the fact that there's practical supports that are needed to bring this to life, and trust that your investment or investing in this process in whatever way is investing in real transformation, long-term systemic transformation. That's the vision, that's the hope. And I think let's shoot for the stars. And I don't think we'll even, no, shoot for the moon, land in the stars. Just shoot for the stars and end up in the Milky Way. I don't know. But let's just go for gold and we'll get there.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, I mean, this is a big piece of work, and to your point, I think among many, the benefits of this work, while we're very deliberately building it around First Nations terms of reference and centering blackfellas in the process, the beneficiaries are everybody on the planet eventually. And so anyone who leans in to support the work in whatever form, pastoral, financial, all the forms of support that we need, it'll be the generations of people that they love that they're yet to meet that'll benefit from this work as well. We're out of time, which is a great pity. It's the end of this session, but it's not the end of this conversation, and we're very grateful for the people who have joined us here in the room and online. This won't be the last you hear from this collaboration. We couldn't miss the opportunity, Adam, of you being in real time in the country. We look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you. But for now, that's our hour up, and I'd ask you to join me in thanking the panellists.